So I was just hoping to get a variety of kind of perspectives and expertises and opinions on John's work. And especially since everyone on the creative team is very professional, I just wanted to get kind of the variety because John talks to, like, you're, I think, a perfect example, really just interesting people that kind of don't fit the mold, so to speak, in every category. So just trying to get a rich perspective of people. So I guess my first question is, how did you hear about John Vervaeke and his work, and what about it initially interested you?
Yeah, I stumbled upon John Vervaeke's work, um, I think in August, just over the summer when I was preparing to teach a course in ancient philosophy online for the first time. I hadn't taught the course even on campus for a few years. So I was a little rusty on the topic, and I just started, Googling to see little videos about the Neoplatonists and this and that, and to just refresh my memory of who said what and whatnot, so that I could organize my syllabus. And that kind of search brought up some of those what are they the awakening from the meaning crisis videos, because he does a whole bunch of stuff on Neoplatonism and the Stoics and this and that. And so just after the very first one that I saw, I was like, whoa, this guy, because in almost every one of them, even though each one of them is narrowly focused, he mentions significant parts of what he's aiming to do over the course of the whole series. So I thought, oh, this is really interesting. So I immediately started. Well, I still had my motive was to get information from this guy. Really knows what he's talking about the ancient Greek philosophers. So let me get that first. I saw those episodes that mentioned those people, but then I was like, I was hooked, and I watched the entire thing, all 50 episodes. I was like, what is that when people binge watch Netflix? I was binge watching John Vervaeke. I was just like, wow, this guy, like so many of his motives and interests and insights and ideas resonated with me. And that's it. I was just kind of hooked. And at the same time, even though I was gearing up for that course, I was in the middle or toward the end stages of editing an anthology on this kind of new field, new in Western philosophy, millennia old in Asian philosophy, which is the philosophy of meditation, right? So, and like I have about 27, 28 authors. It's a big volume. It's the Rutledge Handbook on the Philosophy of Meditation. It's the first collection of essays on the philosophy. Like there's a million things written about meditation, but almost nothing about the philosophy of meditation. What do philosophers think about meditation? Medicine, science, all sorts, neuroscience. There's a million things going on with meditation, but the philosophers have remained pretty quiet, the Western philosophers, because for the longest time they didn't understand it. They viewed it and Asian philosophy altogether as more like religion, and had a kind of with parochial view against that kind of thing. But like that's been something that I've been working on my whole life. That's one of my main areas of interest. But so I lost a couple of contributors who just went AWOL. That happens. This is not the first rodeo of an anthology that I've put together. And this happens that people say they'll do it, but then they can't make the deadline. I'm like, okay, I'm missing a couple of chapters. And that's when I fell in love with John Vervaeke's work. And I said, he might be able to write a chapter for my book. But to guys, he's probably going to be way too busy. Like, just see how productive he was. I thought, well, let me give it a shot. If you don't ask, you can't find out. I sent him an email, and like, that was almost September. And September was my deadline. Like, latest was the end of September. So I thought, he doesn't even have a month. Most people, if you give them a 6 months to a year, most of us who do this kind of work are very busy. We get a lot of sorry, love to, too busy. But I pleaded with him. I said, look, you really belong in this book. This book needs you, whatever. You could, I'd be happy to push the deadline back. I'll see if the publisher, whatever. And he said yes. So I was like, oh man, that's awesome. And then once that happened and we started exchanging, his draft, my feedback, this, that, and the other thing, then he invited me on to Voices with Vervaeke. So that's basically the long and the short of how I met John.
Yeah, that's excellent. Do you teach philosophy
Yeah,
or
yeah, I'm a
psychology, or
professor.
how do
I'm
you,
a
what's your
professor of
background?
philosophy. Professor of philosophy at the City University of New York at one of their community colleges in Brooklyn,
That's
King's.
that's excellent. Yeah, I know that school, and you said like John's output is astronomical, it seems, and so
Yeah,
um,
I
yeah.
can't even keep up with watching his output, much less generating that level of output. The guy is inspired.
Yeah, he has he's centered himself, it seems like, in a world he wants to really put his energy in. So it's like all of his time is kind of work, but it's play. So I don't know how he doesn't burn out, but he
Yeah,
always
it's a
seems
labor of love. Yeah.
right. He's passionate. Yeah. Uh,
Which you could see even when he's doing these talks. He he's got so much to come out that it jumbles him up every now and then. You
well,
know?
that's what I thought was so interesting about your talk with him, because I think, at least on the record, you might be the most serious meditator he's talked with on his channel. And seeing you pull out some things of him was just fascinating to me. It was really cool to see parts of his interest and background and his expertise. I mean, he said things that he's really not talked about in exactly the same way during those two talks. And so it's really just I don't know, to be cheesy, you guys are like a match made in heaven. I could see, like, he's so into practice, and like, so are you. You described yourself once as like the meditator or something like that in your academic department. How did you describe
The
yourself?
meditation guy
Yeah, that's right. Like,
on
who's that
campus.
guy? He's on some different recipe for free will than I am, or something like that.
No, I've seen only a handful outside of the Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. I've seen maybe a half a dozen of his other talks. A couple of voices with Vervaeke and one or two other things with other people. So I'm only beginning to develop a sense of why I saw in the comments under my talk with him people saying, "You guys are like a match made in heaven." I'm like,
Well,
but
because most of his guests are scientists or are very intellectual, and you're both of those, but you're also,
a practitioner,
yeah,
a
you're a
meditation.
practitioner and you embrace it and you're not shy about it. Like, I'm sure a lot of people on his channel have like tried practices but just don't bring it up in that context, maybe. And his Discord server ultimately started because he gave away a bunch of free meditation lessons online. So there's a whole community of people that almost only know him through meditating, or really see him through that lens.
Yeah, I think I saw the first video of his meditation series, and I
Oh,
thought
did
that was
you?
great. Yeah, I thought it was great. In fact, I mean, I have a whole bunch of recorded meditations because I'm the meditation guy on campus, and I
Uh-huh.
record them. I put them on the college website. I've got a lot
Yeah.
of them on my own website and everything. But I refer people to his. I think his are better than mine. So,
Well, that's the nice thing about being interested in this stuff, is you don't have to become a teacher. You can just point people to these great teachers that exist everywhere online now. Even if, like, I think it's so interesting to learn about practices and learn about different visualization styles and different definitions of meditation or creativity. But I don't have to become a teacher, because I can just say like, oh, read this book. It'll save you my interpretation. Or go find these videos. There's this London Buddhist Center, and they put these amazing meditations that I would endorse on. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Um,
I've been teaching meditation for decades, but yeah, so I feel no hesitation to say that guy's got a really great meditation series. If you want to go and from A to Z, watch John Vervaeke's or watch, like you said, or read this pamphlet or whatever.
right. We live in this golden age of information. And if you don't distract yourself with all the nonsense, you can just learn everything you'd ever want today.
Yeah, it's incredible. And yet at the same time, this is one of John's meaning crisis things. We're in an information age, but the more information we have, the less we seem to understand as a society.
Yeah, there's a cognitive load issue, to be technical, right? That my bottleneck is my working memory and what I can kind of learn in a day. And so if technology is ramping up, or I don't even know a third of these social media platforms that have died and resurrected and done all these things.
Yeah, what's the metaphor? There's a philosopher I know named Alvin Noé who made this metaphor, and this was back in like 2012. I was at some conference where he was one of the speakers. Conference was on consciousness, um, and he said it's getting like our glasses are endlessly getting blurred, and we have to
Mhm.
constantly clean them to just keep a grip, you know, John Salt's optimal grip, to keep a grip on what's going on in the world. There's just so much. And what's that? What that other phrase that John uses a lot? Um, um, the explosion, some
Oh yeah.
combinatorial explosion, right? But that's happening to all of us all the time now, like with the stuff that we used to be able to, like it used to be the case. I think I'm older than you. Facial chronological profiling, that, if you read the newspaper or watched the news every night, that was enough for you to keep up on what's going on in the world. Not so anymore. You've got to have feelers in 20 different domains to get a partial view of major changes going on a regular basis. Like you said, you know, if you're 15 years older than the 20-year-olds or whatever, you don't know what's going on in terms of new tech and, all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's exciting and terrifying, right? It's like uncertainty always breeds both of those feelings, and so the potential that you can combine new ideas and expose yourself to great culture has never been higher, but the potential you waste your time and talk to
That's right.
fools has never been higher.
That's
Um,
true. Yeah. Good point.
so
Talking to fools. Yeah, you've got to kiss a lot of frogs before you find a prince.
that's a great attitude, right? If you don't look at it like as, oh, I'm expecting it to always be golden, then it's even better because there are um, so many good communities and things like that. And I'm talking to you. I would have never met you if not for the internet, I would think.
Yeah,
Uh,
in fact, John is not a frog. He's a prince,
yeah.
right? In my metaphor, and like, kissing John using the metaphor, or meeting the prince. But he's opened me up to so many of these, not talking to fools, but talking to the right people and community. Like so many great resources I discovered just by stumbling upon John.
Yeah. What's an example? That's awesome.
Well, like, what do you call it? Those, what's his name? Paul Vanderklay um, did a video commentary on my talks with John,
Uh-huh.
and so and John mentioned it in my second talk with him. So I went and looked, and he told me about the comments. I'm looking in the comments. I'm finding out there's these communities. So I watched the Paul Vanderklay. He already did three different talks about my talk with John with three different groups of people. So there's a Discord group, there's that group, there's all these different, and I'm like, whoa, all these people are brilliant. And then anybody that John interviews is somebody who's now on my list, on my radar. So like anybody I've ever seen him talk to was another prince worth finding.
Right, right. If you can find a good source of information, stick on that because in an overflow, we almost have to use these heuristics. Like, okay, well, who's John talking to? What's he thinking about? Or who's
Yeah.
Abraham Lincoln wondering about compared to the rest of the people in the 1800s or things like that. It's really kind of
Even in my
amazing.
own field, like, there's been so many developments in philosophy since I got my PhD, and
Yeah,
I've narrowly focused on free will, which you mentioned
yeah.
earlier,
I
and
read your book a little
meditation.
bit. Yeah.
Buddhism and meditation and free will, those are my focus areas. But I haven't, been paying attention to all the great stuff that's going on in all these adjacent fields that feed into that, really, like, the latest philosophy of mind, the latest investigations of consciousness, this, that, and the other thing. But now John's talking to all those people, and like they're curated. If they're talking to John, he's curated them. So he's done a lot of my work for me. I even asked him, I think I asked him on the podcast last time or the time before that, I need you to give me the short list of the best books on Neoplatonism because he's a Neoplatonist, right?
Hmm.
And I haven't really read much of that literature.
Yeah.
So he can save me, like, in law school I almost went to law school, but I
Okay.
decided against it at the last minute and went to grad school for philosophy.
Yeah. I
But
got a
in law
perfect
school,
LSAT score.
yeah, me too. That's how I got
Nice.
into grad school.
Well, there we
I
go.
had I had like a top 1 percentile or something on my LSAT.
Yeah, that's
My
impressive.
GRE wasn't good because I didn't even prepare for it, but the
Uh-huh.
LSAT I had prepared for. So
Yeah.
they didn't like my GRE score. I said, "Well, look at my LSAT," and they're like, "Oh!" And I got a free ride in grad school
Wow.
because of my LSAT score, right? But in law school, there's things called horn books. I don't know if you ever got that far to learn
No,
it.
I didn't go to
Yeah,
law
a
school. I
horn
just
book
take
is
tests
like
for fun. Yeah.
it's like a curated, condensed, explanatory presentation of all the main ideas in an area of the law, like tort law or this
Right.
kind of law or that. It's called a horn book,
Okay.
right? So like finding John is like finding a horn book, just like his connections, like what's the most important, who are the most important philosophers doing cognitive science like him, and so on, or philosophy of mind like that guy, I forget Bernardo Kastrup,
Yep.
right? Once I saw two of these 3 hour things already.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa, this is really interesting stuff. As you know, from being an academic within ABD, and like you said, you have to kind of focus on what you focus on, and then you're missing out on a lot of other stuff.
Yeah.
You have a limited cognitive bandwidth, limited cache and short-term memory. We've got all these different,
Well, that's what's
so I push
rewarded in
those things
academia.
aside,
You
but I
have to specialize. You can't just be a generalist
have
and
to,
have a
right.
career.
But I always regret that I haven't kept up on all these
Yeah.
things. So now I just feel like I'm getting a second graduate level education just by being a friend of John's, and watching his stuff.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Yeah, the high quality thought. I remember when Joe Rogan first started, and he kind of brought thought up a level, you could
Yeah.
say. And
One of
then
my
the people that
heroes.
followed him, and now like Jordan Peterson and John, and he was just on Jim Rutt. There was like a 10-hour interview with John on Jim Rutt. Jim Rutt interviews nothing but categorical geniuses. I mean, Lex Friedman's podcast, if you know of him, like he just interviews some of the most futuristic, visionary thinkers on the planet, really. And it's a whole, like I was saying earlier, it's like this utopia, this intellectual utopia, if you're able to kind of navigate it well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a wonderful opportunity. And the more you learn, the more you realize how little you know, but you feel better nonetheless.
Well, no, and even in the 21st century, right, like information-based learning organizations tend to outperform other organizations in those environments that are full of dynamics and full of value when you go learn. And they punish people that are too habitual. Like what was it, Kodak? Do you remember the Kodak camera and then the Polaroid camera? It's like those are both gone, but the
Yeah.
people were able to take that capital and turn it into new companies through learning and through adaptation, really. So, um, yeah, I find this stuff all very exciting. So let me go through some more questions. So,
Sure.
what are the four ways of knowing, and why are they an improvement on how most educators teach about the mind and human knowledge? And if you don't know any of these terms, we can definitely skip any of these questions.
No, I think I can remember them all. So there's propositional, which is the one that's been the primary focus in Western society for the last few hundred years, um, which is knowledge that some proposition is true. Knowing that the cat is on the mat, or that 2 plus 2 is 4, or that E equals MC square, right? That's propositional knowledge. Knowing that propositions are true. And like I said, that's dominated the kind of worldview in Western society, since like the Renaissance, pretty much, the modern era, right? Um, Almost all scientific knowledge is represented propositionally and accumulated. What's in encyclopedias is propositional knowledge for the most part. And there might be some technical knowledge, which is the basis of procedural knowledge, which is one of the other P's. Procedural knowledge is how. So, even in just ordinary epistemology, which is the study of knowledge, that's a big term. Whenever I use a big term, I'll try to, because I don't know who our audience is going to be eventually. But
People
epistemology is
like you.
the study of knowledge. Okay, so then I probably don't have to say what epistemology is, but it is the study of knowledge. So, but epistemologists make that major distinction between, they've made this distinction already between knowledge how and knowledge that. Knowledge that something is the case is propositional. Knowing how to ride a bike or how to speak French or whatever it is, that's a different kind of knowledge. It's a skill. You can extract propositions from it, like if you read a manual on how to do something, right? There's propositions in there, but the propositions alone don't generate the skill. Knowledge how is a skill, and it's an embodied skill. So, and that ties into the whole 4E thing, embodied, extended cognition, all that kind of stuff. But I don't want to go too far into that. I think I remember all the 4 E's, but the 4 P's I can remember. So that's procedural knowledge. Um, the other one is participatory knowledge, which is when you are part of something, participatory. You're part of something. We're part of the universe. We're participating in what John calls the agent arena relationship. We're in a relationship with the world, right? With our perceptions and everything else. So when you experience something, and this is something really important from a meditator's point of view, when you get into an altered state in meditation or through any other way, like psychedelics or whatever it is,
Yeah,
or
alcohol.
rituals, alcohol, whatever, um, you are experiencing reality through some different kind of mode, but you're participating in it in a different way. So if you haven't had the experiential encounter or knowledge, you won't have that kind of perspective. It's a participatory knowledge is related to perspectival knowledge, which is, is that the fourth one?
Yeah.
Propositional, procedural, participatory, and perspectival. There's a deep relationship between all of them, but particularly between participatory and perspectival. By participating in something, you automatically get a perspective that's only possible through that participatory modality. That's the way I would link the two. And I'm not sure if I'm differentiating them properly enough, but
There's no final point, right? We're just
yeah,
questing for more understanding.
yeah. No, but I love the way that I learned about this. Like prior to this terminology, the 4P. I knew about the first two that I mentioned. Philosophy is almost entirely propositional in the West. But through my experience as a philosopher practicing meditation for most of my life, I've been in the participatory and the procedural and the perspectival modes, but without really conceiving of them that way, or at least without being able to articulate them in those terms. Although I've been trying to figure out how to articulate them propositionally to my colleagues who don't really appreciate these alternative ways of understanding or experiencing or knowing. Um, so I think that John is right in that what he says is that modern philosophy seems to have, generally speaking, as a kind of large scale cultural mindset, as there are exceptions with this or that individual philosopher, but as a large scale kind of worldview or Weltanschauung or whatever you want to call it, that's the German word, but yeah, has lost everything but the propositional, right? And like ancient philosophy, East and West, has all four modalities in it. And so we're retrieving and recovering this nowadays, thanks to the kind of work that John and his friends are doing in cognitive science, that's just showing how all these things matter, like, and with neuroimaging, and there's ways of just kind of empirically validating this kind of way of parsing cognition. I like the way that John I mean, those are parts of, I guess, this 4E cognitive science, um, embodied, is it
Embedded,
embedded?
enacted, and
Extended and inactive.
extended, I think is
Extended
what.
and inactive. Yeah, extended cognition is us, we share in knowledge. That's extended, right? We learn from
Mhm.
each other and everything. Most of our knowledge is interpersonally acquired, right?
Well,
I'm
when you
not,
and I were working for the university system and you published a paper and I worked on a paper, that's all feeding into our
yeah, that's
lives in subtle
extended
ways.
cognition. Yeah, that's extended cognition.
Yeah.
Embedded is that we are embedded in a normative framework and in a metaphysical substratum that's an essential component of our cognition, that we can't, the Cartesian dualism is the idea that mind and body are completely separate, like you can be a solipsist, kind of just like, writing your thing on your own and establishing. No, that's, we're in the world. We're
Right.
part of the world. We're not, we're embedded in the world. And the metaphysics of our embeddedness in the agent arena relationship structures our cognition. So that's part of the embedded thing. We're embodied. That's a lot of our learning is psychosomatic or kinesthetic, and you know, uh, there's we're not disembodied spirits. Our bodily states, our emotions, our perceptions all require sense organs. So, like the propositional mode is separate from almost all four of those 4E items. And so your question was, how does these four P's change the way we're understanding the mind? They're related to the 4E also. So because the participatory is part of the 4E thing. You're structured on all four levels. So you're participant, you're a part of the embedded, extended, etc. world, embodied, embedded, extended, and active.
Right.
Everything that we
You're
do
not
is,
this floating alien that's just
yeah,
depressed because
we're
they can't
enacting.
touch things or something.
Yeah, we're enacting, and it's cyclical, and there's a kind of reciprocal feedback loop where we're changing the environment, which changes our cognition, and so on. And so this is a much more interdependent model of cognition and reality, so of epistemology and metaphysics. They're,
Yeah, I love that interdependent because like academic models usually go one direction and the agent is this willful one directioner. But you're
right.
saying like, no, no, the agent is having these forces acted in them and
Yes.
is acting in the world.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
all
I love it.
maximally interdependent. Linearity and linear analysis is necessary and essential for science, but all of this other stuff is also. And if everything is interdependent, this is one of the arguments that I made when I was debating with some Buddhists about free will and the self,
Yeah,
who use interdependence to deny that agency is a real thing, because they deny, like literal Buddhists, there's a kind of literal interpretation of the no self
yeah,
doctrine in Buddhism that says there's no such thing as a self. And one of the primary metaphysical underpinnings of that argument is the Buddhist doctrine, the metaphysics of total interdependence.
mm,
Right? Everything is totally interdependent. So there's no part of you that's separate from anything else, which is some kind of independent, autonomous agent, right? But I think that there's some kind of confusion there. So, but one of the things that this is also an argument about, some of these Buddhist interdependence theorists think that every single aspect of interdependency is like determinism, but an interdependent version of determinism. Now, determinism is normally construed in Newtonian terms: linear causation. Billiard ball A
yeah,
hits billiard ball B in a straight line, pushing B in a straight line, right? So A causes B, and so that's a linear deterministic model. But the Buddhists say that everything is interdependent, right? And so there's no place in any of that. Like, ordinary linear determinism is hard enough for somebody to believe they have free will if that's the case, right? But if everything is maximally interdependent and deterministic, then it's even worse, right?
what I like about John's work is he talks about enabling constraints. So you can describe reality as saying like, oh, there's structure and it limits me, but like my finger is limited. It can't do everything that like an octopus arm can do, but it also affords things that an octopus arm can't. So like there is an
Right.
event happening
Yeah.
that I have agency within, even though there's an incredible amount of pressure and structure limiting my behavior. It's like that which limits is that which enables, which is kind of subtle. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. Prehensile thumb enables something.
right. It's not just a
That
tragedy that
a
it's
being
stuck
that
like
only
this.
has four, that can only do this, has less ability than one that can do this. It's as simple as that, right? I agree. So yeah, and like, so there's this causal analysis, right? And that's embodied and embedded. So given embodied embeddedness and all those different things, there are things that are enabled and constrained simultaneously. But that doesn't mean that it depends on what you mean by free will.
Sure.
So free will might just mean the ability to enact volitions that you have and a slightly more complex ability, right? It's all about abilities and control. The ability to select and choose, favor and disfavor, rank and derank your volitions themselves, to
Right. That's what
reflect
machines
on them.
do.
Right. But I forget the point that I began with by talking about
Well, you were
interdependence.
saying Buddhists would like abstract away the self to such a degree that they wouldn't even let someone, like, they wouldn't attribute any choice to a person.
Right. So yeah, I guess it was unnecessary for me to go into that in great detail, but I brought it up to make this point, which I remember now what my point was, and that is the mere fact of global interdependence, assuming that it, right, doesn't invalidate the individual linear lines of causation. So if you imagine like a kind of holographic universe in which every node in that universe is like a facet of a diamond reflecting every other node, right?
Hmm.
There's still straight lines going from every single one of them to every other one of them. And those are the lines that make for the causal influences that aggregate to the total causal influence, right? So it's just greater, it's just more linearity, on such a grand scale that you say, okay, so every single one of these lines affects every other one of them, but that doesn't obliterate the causal linearity connections between every single node. They're either there or they're not. If they're not there, then there's no interdependence.
Do you read
Interdependence
Nishitani or any of the
requires,
Kyoto school?
pardon?
Do you read Nishitani or any of the Kyoto school?
I just got the book that John recommended to me on religion and nothingness or
Correct. Yeah.
emptiness or whatever. Yeah, I
An
just
even
started
better book
reading.
is The Last Writing, which was the mentor of that author's kind of inspiration. It's called The Last Writings. I can email you the book.
Oh,
Um,
well, I'm going to write it down, but I will hold you to that. It's a complaint, but also an appreciation or a gratitude that every time I watch or speak with John, my reading list keeps growing. I can't keep up with it. Yeah, no, I just told my wife, was it last night, I think, that if my financial situation improves at a certain level where I can retire,
mhm.
um, from my full-time job as a professor, I want to spend the larger part of my day reading and the smaller part of my day writing and doing podcasts and things like that. I want to learn more. I'm
Yeah.
eating up the fact that John has helped me curate so much stuff because, like you said, there's just so much out there. You have to kiss a lot of frogs before you find free. But I've got like a shortcut to all the princes now. So,
Yeah, if I have one friend that can recommend me good books, they're just like a better friend to me. It's that the high quality stream of even fiction, but philosophy, science, art. I go to a lot of art museums and then share photos, and my friend sends me photos of these churches. You said you're near New York, that are just these massive churches, and so having a social network, especially if you want to be an expert
St.
in
John the
something, is
Divine.
subtle. Yeah.
If you're ever in New York, go to St. John the Divine's Cathedral.
Okay, I love great buildings. Like it almost takes you to a
Yeah,
different
for
time.
years, my first meditation teacher was holding our weekly meditations there. It's just a
Oh, wow,
wonderful space. Yeah.
that's awesome. So let me just go to the next one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, so, what are the three orders: nomological, normative, and narrative? And how does thinking in these terms help someone live a more intelligible and meaningful life?
Nomological,
And if you're not
normative.
familiar with any of those, you can either ask
Yeah,
me or I can
no.
skip it.
Yeah, no. Nomological, normative, and narrative.
Hmm.
I remember hearing about them a lot during the Meaning Crisis series. But I think that the nomological is like the scientific type structure of, the world, the lawful nature of things. You know, that's what nomological means, right? Having to do with law. So, like the structure or the order of the universe, you know, that could be interpreted in many different ways, in Newtonian terms, in quantum terms, in Neoplatonic terms, and all these other ways. So that's kind of like metaphysics. The substratum of the universe is the nomological level. Of course, science and like our mostly scientifically informed materialist culture thinks that that's almost all that there is, although we also exist in the normative, which is everything, all our value judgments, everything that really matters to us is in the normative domain, absolutely everything. And most of it would be meaningless, I'll just add this, if we didn't really have free will.
Why?
Because almost every value judgment that we make it has a volitional component to it. Like, I want the world to be a certain way. I approve of these things. I find this desirable and that undesirable. This is favorable, that's unfavorable. We should do more of this and less of that. This is beautiful, that is ugly. This is harmful, that is wholesome, right? Those are all normative judgments, right? But if we can't control how we make those judgments at all, like if we're automatons, right, then it's like we're characters in a script that's been written by the nomological, right? If the nomological level is just the order of nature is determining all these things, then we're just kind of members in some kind of cosmic play that we're not writing the script for. It should be up to you what you find
Yeah, we're not
desirable.
this tragedy just being swept around.
Right.
We can stop and say, okay, I'm going to not go there anymore. I'm going to try and fall in love even more with him or her, or I'm going to learn more about this weakness I have and adjust or something, or just appreciate things like you're talking about epistemically subjective things a lot of times. Is that the way you should say that?
You can say, yeah, well,
Okay.
subjective means epistemic, right? Subjective can be talked about epistemically or metaphysically. So you might say that the color green, right? If you're one of those people who thinks that colors don't really exist outside of perception, right? They're not features of the objective world. They're not part of the nomological order. You might say that they're metaphysically subjective or intersubjective because only beings with rods and cones and
Mm,
visual cortices like ours experience electromagnetic radiation not being absorbed by the object's surface as colors, right? And therefore they're intersubjective or ultimately subjective, right? Whereas the shape and mass of an object is an objective feature of the object, right? So you could speak about it, subjective and objective, as if they are metaphysical qualities,
hmm
two different categories of metaphysical, two different types of reality,
hmm
right? But you can also speak about them epistemically, right? Like, well, how do I know that something is a lemon because it's yellow? And that, like, it can be approached either which way.
hmm
I mean, and there's a way in which those two terms are both epistemic and epistemological, and metaphysical, because the very meaning of the distinction between the two of them is mind independently real. So if something is mind independently real, then it's objective. If its reality requires some kind of cognitive apparatus to even detect it, then it's partly mind dependently real, which means subjective,
hmm
right? So whether or not the epistemic agent, the existence of an epistemic agent is necessary for the reality of that thing makes it subjective, right? So
hmm
then you can see the epistemology is built into the metaphysics of that distinction.
I see. Yeah. No, philosophy is very technical in that way that it's rewarding to pull those things apart, but then in psychology, they call it like jingle jangle, and just the like the cognitive load. There's just
Oh
so
yeah,
much
jingle
happening,
jangle.
and
Yeah, one term with two meanings,
right.
two terms with one meaning, all that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
what is
then
it to philosophize? What is the thought? It's like, well, are those one thing each, or are they many things to many people? Um,
yeah, but let me
great.
I feel like I wasn't clear enough about that claim that if there's no free will, then the entire normative world either collapses or it will lose half of its value. The better way of putting that would be to just use the strongest case, which is moral judgments.
Okay, great. Yeah.
All right. So if I think that you've wronged me, right? And so then I think that you're a bad person, right? That requires me to believe that it was up to you not to do what you did. If it wasn't really fully up to you, but it
Uh-huh.
was just your genes and other phenomena from the Big Bang happened, and then you were going to wrong me. It's a direct line of causation. If we're in a deterministic world, we're only in a nomological world, right? There's a Big Bang, A, B, C, D, E, F led to Z, you wronged me, right? But if given the Big Bang, you had to wrong me, right? Because determinism is true, and A causes B, B causes C, you have no alternative, right? Then me being angry at you or thinking you wronged me is like me being angry at lightning for striking and burning my house down.
Hmm.
I might be really upset, but I can't blame the lightning or be angry at the lightning. It's just an impersonal force.
There's a
Right, if
crisis
lightning
almost in your anger. If you're
right, if lightning
angry for
was
no
Zeus,
reason, you're
right,
insane.
right, if lightning was Zeus and Zeus had free will and he chose to zap my house, then I could be angry at Zeus.
Hmm.
But if Zeus is just an intermediate chain and has no free will, just like you, if you have no free will and you do something, it's kind of like, to make an analogy, if somebody is pushed into you from behind when you're getting on the subway
Yeah,
and
yeah.
like they didn't do it, they were pushed into you. You getting angry at them, you should get angry at the person who pushed them. But even if the person who pushed is being pushed by forces that he can't control, then there's no rationale in getting angry at anybody or
Hmm.
making moral judgments about anybody. So
Why
that,
would you care if you couldn't control things? Like
yeah, this
care
is
and control are
a
related.
standard argument in the free will literature is
Mhm.
that full-blooded, rationally grounded moral judgments require true moral agents, and true moral agents have free will. They can deliberate about the pros and cons of their anticipated actions,
Mhm.
weigh the consequences. They can upvalue or devalue
Right.
the predictions or their preferences. They have control over their volitions. If they don't, then they're not like, here, what's the example? If somebody's disabled and in a wheelchair and they're quadriplegic, they can't control their body at all. What's the saying? Ought implies can, Immanuel Kant.
Yeah.
So if that person can't help someone, we can't hold them morally responsible for failing to do so.
Hmm.
They
In
can't do it.
psychology, even in like in studies, people get upset more when they believe something is imaginable as avoidable when they believe it's totally impossible. So if I'm like you said, if I'm standing next to a hole I you think I know of and you fall in, you'll be mad at me. I definitely didn't push you in the hole. There's no way my birth put you
Right.
in that hole. But you can imagine me just saying, "Hey buddy, look out." And so you'll get like triggered or angry, or you'll have a like a moral judgment, to use what you were saying, based on knowing that was avoidable somehow by human volition.
Yeah. Look, I don't want to give the wrong impression as if
No,
my
yeah,
view, as if no, as if my view is some kind of consensus position within
I should
philosophy.
agree less.
Yeah, actually, mine is more of a minority view. Most contemporary analytic philosophers think that free will is an illusion, right? So I
Well,
have a
caring, like you can choose what you care. Like you said, you're married, and that wasn't like a careless decision. I don't think. Like you said, I care about X, and I'm staking my claim on it. And that's philosophy to me. Um,
right. Well, just in fairness to the other side, So friends of mine who are, free will skeptics, as we'll
Okay.
call them, or free
Yeah.
will deniers, will say that, well, no, you might lose some moral judgments if there's no free will, but many of them could still survive, perhaps in a revised or revisionary, modified form. So take athletic judgments, like, wow, what a great performance, or even artistic performances, right? My wife is an artist. Here's a
Oh,
couple of,
cool. Yeah.
here's one painting of, it's kind of abstract, mother and daughter facing each other. This one over here is, what is she called? It's the angel of death, right? You could go, oh, wow, that's really great, right? Um, but if like the weather produced that, right? Like images in the sand
Okay.
created by the waves, you go, wow, look at what this coincidence that nature produced, right? So, but if my wife, as the artist, is just a funnel for causal forces operating through her, then these are like just like images in the sand.
Mhm.
Um, so she's the, I can't say, you did a great job. You didn't really do it. The Big Bang did it. The
Right.
Big Bang
All of
did
your
it.
processes and intelligence and personality, they're acting before you even have a conscious thought or
Right,
something like that. You
right.
could reduce it to.
But
Yeah.
yeah, but we could still say, well, but he's still a great, like Michael Jordan is still a great basketball player, even though it's not up to him that he is. He's still a great basketball player. He's good at it, right? And she's good at that, even though ultimately it's the Big Bang, right? Proximally, we can make these judgments. I still don't want you to mistreat me. I'm going to have negative emotions about you if you mistreat me. They might not be completely rationally grounded because you're not ultimately responsible, right? But a lot of our normativity can be salvaged in a modified form. That's what the my opponents say. And I think, no, I think almost all normativity goes out the window if we, all full-blooded, robust normativity goes out the window. But
Yeah, and I think, yeah, why they're demonstrating the ability to be rational by revising their opinion.
that's it. That's
And
an excellent
so,
insight.
like,
Yeah.
I always want my theory to match reality and my reality to match theories, because I studied organizational psychology, and every week we'd have a brown bag speaker, and the echelons, I was at the world's best program, the echelons of the field would just throw theories at these young speakers and go, you could look at it this way, that way, this way, that way. And we're unlimited on theories, but there's still one event we're talking about. There's a phenomena that we must be talking about. And so if you throw the phenomena out, I'm not sure why you'd even want to theorize.
Yeah, it's
Like,
a really good insight that you just mentioned, that the person who denies free will is kind of committing a performative contradiction. Because are they saying that their speech is just coming out of them the way a burp or a sneeze does? Right? That's what they're implying.
and do they care about their self or their child the same way they care about a burp or a sneeze? Like, no, they just
Right,
don't.
right,
And
right.
I'm glad my blood glucose is good, but I'm just happy to talk to you. That's where my happiness is coming from. It's not coming from this osmotic regulation. Like, that's prerequisite to a human being, but not sufficient to describe one, I don't think.
Yeah, so you have very good philosophical instincts,
I spent a lot of time with John and good
Robert.
thinkers, I think.
Yeah, one of the similar claims that John made that only really became vivid to, like, I never thought about it, was that we don't fit in our own model of science.
Can't have subtracted us away. Intelligence can subtract. Like, think about it, you're in a really loud library and you could be smart enough to ignore everything and learn. Like, I have friends that were able to do that really well in high school and college, but that's a subtractive thing. And if you have a science model that subtracts out your own feelings or your arms and legs, like, you could do that, but that doesn't seem like a good, like, final place to stand.
Yeah, subtraction, extraction, those are all important skills. One of my meditation teachers, Ram Dass,
Yeah, I've heard of him. Yeah, and heard you talk
said
about him.
something like, yeah, the problem with the modern Western mind is that it's all right over here.
Hmm.
It ignores all the rest of us. This
Yeah,
little
I
part
mean,
of us that,
romance is important to me, and holding my mother's hand is important to me. There's no model that tells me that. And if you extract it down to like a list of motivations and like a list of, even codependent relationships, it's like, well, that's true.
Everything that matters is in the nomological realm, at least. It has to
Mm,
have that. But the narrative depends on both the nomological and the normative, but more on the normative. And the narrative is precisely that part where we can make sense of things that are not simply nomological.
ooh, that's good. Yeah, I think that puts it in the right place, right?
Like
Because
what
you're,
you were just talking
ooh,
about,
yeah,
you don't, it's not the functioning of enzymes in your liver or your blood
right.
pressure
My
or,
norms aren't working. Let me go to the narrative.
right,
Huh.
right.
Wow. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question. Um, what are any barriers to appreciating, understanding, or applying ideas from John's work?
Wow, that's a really good broad question. Well, I think that it's hard to generalize over his work because some of his conversations, like with Bernardo Kastrup, require a lot of background knowledge in philosophy of mind and cognitive science just to kind of figure out what they're saying and what are they actually battling over? Why are they disputing that point? Why do they differ on that? All those you have to have a fairly comprehensive basic level understanding at least. You had to have taken a few courses in philosophy of mind or something like that to be able to make the right connections, right? So when you say John's work, I thought of this. Well, two things: awakening from the meaning crisis. That's on one end. His meditation sequence. That's even more accessible to the general public, right? So you don't need to be a scholar at all to be able to benefit from his work in his meditation series. You need to be a generally educated person, I think, to be able to follow and be able to grasp a good majority of the stuff in the awakening from the meaning crisis thing. And then the things that you don't like, if he's talking about Spinoza's ethics and you never read it, you can get a sense of what he might mean, but you could still follow most of what he's saying, right? But when you follow like him and Bernardo Kastrup, you've got to be somebody who's done a lot of reading in those fields to be able to parse most of what, the bulk of it. Or you could follow the bulk of awakening from the meaning crisis if you're just you went to college, or something like that. But so that's what I would say. It's mostly background information. It's background information that's a given. So that's an issue depending on how complex the level of John's work is that you're looking at. I mean, if you're going to read one of his papers in cognitive science, that's really challenging. You have to have a lot more knowledge than almost anything that I just said. Um, I didn't read his book about zombies yet. Did you read it?
I've read a big chunk of it. I don't think I've read every page, but I'm
I would
pretty.
imagine that that's a kind of book that the general reader could grasp. I would imagine that, but I
It's
don't
it,
know.
it has its own set of like artistic vocabulary that's still pretty high level, but it is more kind of story like than technical. Yeah,
Okay, so there's two things. One is your informational background.
yeah,
What's your cognitive landscape, the level of complexity, the higher or lower resolution in your cognitive repertoire, you know? That's first. But then second is your kind of ideological biases. So many people, this is like something that I've battled with even with other philosophers or highly educated philosophers of mind and all that. In fact, say one of my friends who majored in philosophy of mind in grad school, when I had him read a chapter that I wrote in a kind of autobiographical thing about my mystical experiences, I was just curious to run it by like an analytic philosopher
yeah.
who knows a lot about philosophy of mind because does this fit into our
Right.
understanding of
It's great
consciousness and
criticism.
all that? And what did he say to me? You're making claims about your experiences that are like it's almost as if you're stomping around with big boots on over a bunch of landmines that you're acting like you don't see. philosophers of mind are arguing about these things on such a level, like, your stuff just seems impossible to believe. Or, don't you believe in Descartes? Like, how could you believe you really had those experiences? That you're supposed to doubt things like that. You're an analytic philosopher. This is the feedback that I got. So having the education is not enough. Having lots of knowledge is not enough. You have to be open-minded. You have to be able to entertain alternative hypotheses that members of your ideological tribe, so to speak, normally poo-poo in
Yeah.
order to take them seriously. What is the word John uses a lot? Plausibility, like his arguments about what makes something plausible, right? It doesn't mean, for something to be plausible doesn't mean that it's addressed all the possible objections that critics of that idea have already mapped out. No, it just has to be, it's non-contradictory. There's some models for how it could be true. There's some evidence that it might be true. What it's alleging is meaningful and plausible. I don't want to use the word plausible in the definition of plausible, but meaningful, promising, interesting, relevant, etc. Worthy of further pursuit, worthy of further investigation,
But
right?
that's where it gets shot down, right, by the ideology. As soon as they say, is it worthy? They go, nope, it's missing X, and I don't even care anymore.
Yeah, let me
Yeah,
make an example. Let me
that's
make an
great.
analogy. Um, Suppose that there really is such a thing as telepathy.
Oh boy.
What the metaphysics of it is a separate question,
Sure.
right?
They say the
But
philosophers aren't really concerned with the hows as much, so we'll just get rid of the how.
yeah, so right, so most philosophers will just say, oh, telepathy presupposes a metaphysical dualism, mind and body, mind as an immaterial, supernatural substance. You need some kind of substance through which telepathy could happen, like an ether or something, and they'll just dismiss the idea as ludicrous.
Hmm.
We got rid of ideas like that when we got
Yeah.
rid of the ether and
Yeah.
phlogiston and all these other.
Supernatural, gone.
Yeah, it's almost
Yeah.
like saying you believe in astrology, right?
Right.
But I mean, with quantum entanglement, if you can say, look, there may be ways in which information can be transmitted. What was the thing that Einstein was against? Spooky action at a distance, triple AD, action at a distance, right? Impossible, that can't happen. But quantum entanglement is action at a distance. When two atoms or particles have ever been together, it doesn't matter if they're a universe apart. Touch one and the other one is touched.
Yeah, yeah. Like you said,
You
we're
know?
embedded, so I'm kind of touching the thing touching Saturn.
Right, right. And so maybe somehow or another, Robert and Rick can have some kind of entanglement of information which our brains, because of evolution, have, make telepathy, some
Okay.
kind of information. It's possible, right? It's not ludicrous.
Well,
It's,
in biology, it gets like more fine grained and fine grained and fine grained. And like the stuff that they can see today is like maybe there are particles exchanging between our physical bodies, and who knows? And
right. Well,
uh,
space time is a web. It's a fabric, right? It's not the way we used to think of it. That space is some kind of abstraction, like in Euclidean geometry. Time is a thing. It's a field or whatever, however you want to say it.
sure,
It's not the
sure.
way we used to think of it, and we're embedded in it.
Yeah.
And it's all connected. Like every atom in the universe, every particle in the universe is in some kind of gravitational relationship with every other particle. And how does that work? We don't know, right? So just to like laugh a subject like that out of the books a priori is not empirical. And my
Yeah.
meditation experiences with my analytic colleagues, those are just examples of the second part. I said there were two levels. There's your cognitive landscape. You need to
Mhm.
have the information to be able to appreciate what's being claimed,
Yeah.
but then you have to have an open mind
That's
to
great.
be able to consider that novel ideas like what are coming out of John, right? For the average person, even the average philosopher, given the limited analytic, empirical, positivistic perspective that has dominated Western analytic philosophy for the last 3 centuries,
Mhm.
right? if that's your paradigm and you're closed-minded and you laugh at things like telepathy, you're going to laugh at many of the claims that somebody like John makes, although they're not as outlandish, I suppose, as the claim of telepathy or something
They
like
seem
that.
more plausible to me.
Yeah,
John versus
right,
telepathy.
right. But I'm using that as an exaggeration so that the point can be more
No,
vivid.
one of the things that we talked about in the group meetings is there's kind of, and you're a perfect intermediary, right? Because there's two groups. There's the very like, I'm into spirituality. I can even get into woo. I can get into like science fiction and social things, and I get my information from people. And then there's like engineers and scientists, and they, see anything that's not observable as gone. It's not real. And so if you say, well, thought is like the ether, then they've already like closed their little ear holes and they're not really like, well, what is he being metaphorical? They're not even kind of inquiring into the thing. And I mean, that makes sense. You don't want to be a chaotic thinker. You don't want to just have no worldview. So having a stable worldview that you're defensive about isn't that outlandish. But it's tough when these two kind of tribes are battling each other about the same thing. And it's like they both want something from their perspective only.
One thing that you didn't ask, but that I want to add
Yeah, go
here
ahead.
is that one of the things that I love about John's work, whenever he's talking to anyone else, or even whenever he's presenting, like in the Meaning Crisis series, he presents both sides, he considers both sides,
That's part of
and,
his lecture style, his plausibility.
he's
Yeah.
fair to both sides. But even when he's like in that Castrop thing, the moderator, I forget his name, encourage them
Kurt, yeah.
yeah, to both debate, but then to switch over to a kind of dialogos approach where we're exploring together, we're collaboratively searching and inquiring, we're on the same team, to go back and forth. Oh, well, let's debate that. What are the strengths and weaknesses of that? So that he does both,
Well,
and
John, you
he
can see him think when he talks. You can see him putting together new things. And he is, like you said, he's listening. He's not just trying to go, okay, well, what are my 7 good points, which he has, but he's also like, okay, well, he criticizes himself from 5 years ago, or he's not just kind of trying to finish and share what he has, but he's like, okay, here's what I've got so far, and let's keep building on it. Like, I don't know, he's so creative about those
yeah.
kind of things that you're talking
And
about.
I respect that tremendously.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, academia does not incline scholars to that sort of engagement because we have to stake out a niche territory where we are right about something, right? That's what your dissertation is.
You
that's what
can't
we have.
say, and then my conclusion is I have no conclusion.
Right, right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the industry, the engine of the whole enterprise is kind of antithetical to what John is doing, but what John is doing is absolutely essential, in my opinion, to resuscitate the dying divisiveness that academic specialization kind of forces on academics. It silos everybody.
Mhm.
But he's in a field that fortunately requires multidisciplinary work, cognitive science, and it's just also his personality. I think his integrity and his great characters, which I think probably have a lot to do with his multiple decades of spiritual development practices.
Like he was
I know.
teaching 9 classes or giving away meditation lessons or doing like, I'm really going to think about this question from 80 perspectives rather than publish 80 papers that are kind of flimsy.
Yeah.
So he's almost the opposite of what a successful scientist should do.
Right.
Despite that, he's at a top university and luckily has tenure. But it's not because of his habits, it's because of his like intelligence or something like
Yeah,
that.
he's in the teaching stream, not the publishing stream. I noticed when after watching his series and I looked him up just to find his email, I had to go to look at his CV or something. I said he hasn't published much, but those few things that he published, they look really good. Listening to him, like the guy could publish encyclopedias if he had the time, right? But obviously he's more interested in just exploring and developing and sharing those things than getting academic credentials by having them published.